can you just confirm you're ready to? See now then. Confirm, ready to? Okay. Good morning. Welcome. We want to acknowledge you this December 14, 2000.
Recording in progress.
We welcome you to this fourth in our series of public consultations on topics relevant to the futures of higher education within the Caribbean. Today, we want to focus on sustaining tertiary education in small islands, developing states. And we are preparing for a regional conference on higher education being sponsored by UNESCO ESALC. This conference will be held in Brasilia, the 13th to the 15th of March, 2024. As part of this effort, a number of working groups have been established, and these working groups are focused on a number of topics, 12 in total. The working groups: educational system in Latin America, cultural diversity, interculturality, internationalization, the role of higher education in the face of social challenges, research generally. What is the strategic role of higher education in the sustainable development of Latin America and the Caribbean? Teacher training, the impact of COVID, issues of inclusion and diversity, with a particular focus on the role of women, higher education financing and governance, the autonomy of higher education institutions, and incidentally, there is a webinar later this afternoon focused on this matter of the autonomy of institutions and then the futures of higher education in the Caribbean. The preparatory meeting for the Regional Higher Education Conference held in March 2023 in Cordoba, Argentina, approved the constitution of these working groups. The working groups have the triple objectives of taking stock of achievements and pending challenges, promoting a regional consensus on the priorities for the development of higher education in the region in the next 5 years, drafting a basic document on the corresponding axes to help guide and enrich the discussions during CREAS +5 and a final declaration. Therefore, this consultation series will allow the Caribbean to make a critical contribution to this discussion as part of the wider Latin America and the Caribbean. Leonardo Garnier, Special Advisor of the UN Secretary General for the Transforming Education Summit, in his foreword to the summit's report noted that education confronts a dynamic triple crisis: crisis of equity and inclusion, as millions are out of school; crisis of quality, as many of those who are in school are not learning the basics; and a crisis of relevance, as many educational systems are not equipping the new generations with the values, knowledge, and skills they need to thrive in today's complex world. This triple crisis is compounded given the climate emergency and its impact on nations categorized as small islands, developing states. UNESCO's Action Plan for SIDS, adopted in 2016, embraces the Samoa pathway and integrates its priorities across all our programs. This action plan embodies and guides UNESCO in its efforts to build capacities through education and training, to promote scientific research and conservation of the environment, in particular the oceans, to safeguard cultural heritage, to uphold the cultural diversity of SIDS as a motor for innovation and sustainable development, to improve information management and knowledge sharing, and to ensure the fullest participation of youth and social inclusion. This plan also encompasses UNESCO's response to combating climate change through the strengthening of capacities in SIDS to deal with emergencies triggered by natural disasters. It is irrefutable that there is no substitute for good education. It is impossible to imagine a future of prosperity and peace on a healthy planet without a functional, forward-looking, and highly performing education system. SIDS are particularly vulnerable to the effects of global shocks and crises, such as the COVID-19 pandemic or the war in Eastern Europe. The resulting disruption to supply chains and spikes in energy and food prices have had a significant impact on SIDS, placing them under high debt distress and deepening their need for development-based support. The decline in tourism and other critical national income sources has also severely constrained the fiscal space for SIDS, reducing the capacity of governments to reform education systems. SIDS are also experiencing some of the highest rates of young people not in education, employment, or training, NEET. The lack of income opportunities in domestic markets means that labor migration has become a common solution to filling shortages and tackling joblessness. As a result, reliance on remittance inflows and imported goods and fuels continues to grow. Against the background of the challenges involved in delivering quality education, SIDS are faced with the crisis of sustaining the required investment over the long term in order to realize quality outcomes. The UNESCO ESALC Caribbean Public Consultation Series, The Futures of Higher Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, but particularly in the Caribbean, in preparation for the regional conference, is engaging the issue of sustaining tertiary education systems given the vulnerabilities of SIDS. Arising from this engagement will be a submission on behalf of the Caribbean as to the recommendations and actions for transforming and supporting quality outcomes. This morning, we are delighted to have with us, to begin the conversation, Dr. Romina Miorelli. Dr. Miorelli is an education consultant with a focus on tertiary education and expertise in the areas of lifelong learning, skills development, graduates tracking, tracer studies, quality assurance, gender inclusion, rankings and classification tools, and development of strategies and policies, especially in Eastern Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean, and East Africa. She is experienced in designing and conducting trainings and workshops with a wide range of stakeholders, from national ministries to grassroots organizations, with excellent research and writing skills. Dr. Miorelli is an education consultant with the World Bank, with a focus on tertiary education as well as on skills and lifelong learning in Eastern Europe, South Asia, Caribbean states, Middle East, and the Horn of Africa. This morning, she's going to share with us preliminary findings from a research project that the World Bank is leading, engaging the Eastern Caribbean states. Dr. Miorelli, over to you.
Hello. I hope you can hear me. It looks like I am unmuted, so I guess you are hearing me. I will share, as Dr. Black explained to you, some preliminary findings about research the World Bank has been conducting on the OECS member states to understand the post-secondary landscape, including higher education and non-tertiary education in the 6 Organization of Eastern Caribbean States members that are members of the World Bank. So to share with you this presentation, give me 1 second and I will try to share my screen. Hopefully it will work. Let's see. Yeah, no. Yeah. Okay.
Dr. Muriel seems to have been bounced off the platform. Just a moment, and we allow her to rejoin.
Damien, sorry. Romina left.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
what I'm seeing. So I just saw that and made a comment. Let me, until she rejoins, let me proceed with the presentation.
There she is. Damien, sorry. There she is.
Thank you.
There she is again.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that.
I'm sorry about that. When they asked me for permission to share, it closed and I had to join again. Sorry about that. Let me see if this works now. It looks better now. There we go. So can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as I explained, this is the research that we have been doing in the bank starting actually a couple of years ago. And what I will present to you are some main highlights about the landscape of post-secondary education in these 6 members of the OECS, which are the members of the World Bank. And this research draws on several different sources, including international databases, interviews with stakeholders, and surveys that we have conducted in the region. The focus of this research has been on national colleges, but I will include some information for the broader picture of the tertiary education landscape in the region. So just to give you very quick regional context, not so specifically about the region in terms of what has to do with its vulnerabilities, but more specifically about aspects that have to do with tertiary education. Some highlights that I think it is important to bear in mind when talking about higher education in the small islands of the OECS is the importance of youth unemployment, which was discussed earlier, and also young people not in education or employment in the region. What we have is that in general, unemployment has been very high in these OECS 6 countries, which are the 6 members that we are talking about, and I will explain. These are Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. During the pandemic, of course, unemployment expanded, and it's only slowly and unevenly returning to pre-pandemic levels. But what is more important with regards to higher education is that youth unemployment is very high in these countries. Preceding the pandemic, there were more than 40% of young people that were unemployed in St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Grenada. And during the pandemic, this increased significantly. Between 2019 and 2021, youth unemployment grew by 20% in St. Lucia, 37 and 45%, and 9% in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, from 38 to 41%. So what is important to bear in mind in the context of this conversation is that unemployment rates, however, are lower for the individuals with high levels of skills across these 6 countries. And this was still the case during the pandemic, indicating that higher education, tertiary education, is a good protection against crisis and, in this case, unemployment. But in the region, although higher educated people have better employment outcomes, these are worse positioned than in the rest of Latin America in average. So those with high skills are worse position in the labor market in the OECS 6 countries when they are compared with their peers in Latin America. An important aspect has to do with skills mismatches. There are skills shortages and mismatches which are impeding growth in the region. And it has been expressed by different employers and firms that having an inadequately educated workforce is one of the most important obstacles to develop businesses in the countries, especially in Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where it's one of the most important obstacle for mid and large size companies. And the most significant indicator for what regards higher education is that the mismatches are not so much about the disciplines studied and the sectors in which they work, but they are under-skilled, meaning that they don't have the level of education that most jobs required. And I want to show you in that respect some statistics that we found that have to do with the problem of undereducated workforce in St. Lucia and how this has remained more or less the same throughout the pandemic. Still, most of the people working in St. Lucia are undereducated, which is the blue bars here, for the position that they occupy. And another big problem that I wanted to put here, but which is very well known, is the problem of brain drain or high-skilled emigration in the country. So yes, we may have the high-skilled people needed for the jobs, but also what happens is that they are leaving the country. So, and here you have some data about that regarding the high-skill levels, high-skill level people living outside the OECS 6 countries around the world. And most of them are women. So what is the post-secondary education landscape in the OECS 6 at the moment? What we find is that the system is somehow different from the system in other countries of the world, especially because higher education is attended by people from 16 years old over, which makes it difficult to compare with statistics from around the world where people attend higher education after 18 years old. Another problem is that the national colleges are an amalgamation of different institutions that existed in the past, and therefore it is difficult to compare data even within the countries because they have created new programs or new departments based on what they had before in other, when they were secondary schools or technical colleges. So even within the country is difficult. One very important feature which is to highlight is the flexibility, the different paths within which people can access higher education. There are lots of programs, bridge programs to help students with lower certifications to enter higher education that they prepare, they provide remedial courses. And another key feature is the importance of private providers and international students in some of the countries, especially Grenada and St. Kitts and Nevis. And this poses another difficulty to analyze data. So what we have in terms of institutions is 45 educational institutions that provide post-secondary education in these states. And there is a mix of private and public. 26 are private and 19 publicly funded. But the public institutions that we count here include 8 branches of the University of the West Indies, which provide distant learning in these different member states. And in Antigua, there is a 5-island campus for face-to-face education. So when we talk about the national colleges in each of the member states, we are talking about the Antigua State College, the Dominica State College, T.A. Mary Jo Community College, Clarence Fitzroy Bryan College in St. Kitts and Nevis, and the previous one was in Grenada, Mary Jo Community College is in Grenada, Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines Community College. So this is what I was talking about when we speak about the mix of private and public and the presence of international students in some countries. You can see the gross enrollment rates in these 6 members of the OECS that vary significantly in terms of female and male, where female are much more predominant than males in these institutions. But also there is a huge difference between Grenada and St. Kitts and Nevis, where you can see enrollment rates that go above 100%, meaning that possibly meaning that this is a reflection of the high number of students that come from abroad, which is one of the reasons why it makes it difficult to understand or compare data in these countries. But this is the information about gross enrollment rates. And what you can see is that these enrollment rates are behind the enrollment rates in the rest of the region and Latin American states in general. A quick view at the governance of these institutions. What we have, especially focusing on national colleges, as I mentioned, is that in each of these states, these institutions are governed by the General Education Laws and the Colleges Act that specify how these colleges operate. But the colleges are autonomous in terms of human resources management, so hiring staff, but also in terms of the use of the finances that they are provided by the government. There are strategies at regional level that include objectives and priorities in tertiary education. The OECS has an education strategy, but only has one chapter there dedicated to tertiary. Sorry?
Hola, bien, bien. ¿Y tú, Teo? ¿Cómo estás?
Muy
bien, todo bien.
I have a... Sorry, Julia, I think you're... Someone's talking there. Right. But there are no national strategies for tertiary education, at least not that we have located in these member states. And similarly, in the ministries, there are no dedicated units for tertiary education, although in some cases there are some staff allocated to tertiary education or technical education, with the exception of a new unit in St. Vincent and the Grenadines that does not belong to the ministry, but to the Cabinet Office. Lastly, about quality assurance in terms of governance, what we found is that quality assurance is in its early stages in the region. It is fragmented and is overloaded with different functions. There are quality assurance agencies in the region that you can see in orange here, and this diagram tries to represent all the different instances of quality assurance to which national colleges are subjected to. So one is this quality assurance agencies. Another one, because national colleges also provide technical education, are the national training agencies or councils. And another one are international bodies for quality assurance, or local professional bodies for nursing, for instance, or pharmaceutical, which are relevant for the regulated professions. The objective of this diagram, I'm not going to go into details with this, is to show that although quality assurance agencies are new, national colleges have been working towards ensuring quality, not only because of internal processes of quality assurance, but also through endorsing their courses with different local professional bodies, or developing courses that have been created with the support of people within the Ministry of Education, working in curriculum development or national training agencies. However, everything that has to do with quality assurance in the way that is done in other international settings is in its early stages. Quality assurance agencies lack at the moment sufficiently trained or expert staff, and is overloaded by lots of functions, not just processes of quality assurance, but also a lot of verification processes that have to do with ensuring that diplomas are legitimate, especially in the context of problems with diploma mills. I wanted to highlight very quickly a very important issue with higher education in the region in the post-pandemic context. One important thing, the most important thing, I think, has to do with decay in academic readiness. So what is happening is that national colleges are receiving students that are less well prepared to conduct their studies than how they were before the COVID pandemic. And this table, this chart, so also represents the proportion of students that managed to pass the end of secondary school exams that they need to have to enter higher education. So you can see that, for instance, in mathematics, in 2019, which was already a low base, 46% only of those that sat these exams managed to pass the exams, and we have 37% in last year, in 2022. So I think this is an important effect of the pandemic that has to be taken into account in the functioning of higher education at the moment. And finally, the point that I wanted to make is not just about the quality of teaching and students, but what has to do with research, innovation, and partnerships in these colleges. There are ongoing activities that regard sustainability, green, blue economies, trying to develop skills for recycling, and lots of things that have to do with improving the environment. And not only that, and this is also something very important in the strategy of the OECS and in the institutional strategies of the colleges, but there are very important limitations to make this happen, which have to do with financial resources, with infrastructure and the environment, the educational environment and the research environment, and also importantly with a low level of digital skills among the teaching staff. So this is some preliminary findings that have to do with resources that you can find in these institutions, for instance, with laboratories. And what you have highlighted in orange here is laboratories that have less than 5% of the different colleges that you have here: Antigua State College, Mary Shaw College in Grenada, Dominica State College, Sir Arthur Lewis College in St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines College. All these orange, they have insufficient resources in their laboratories when it's marked with orange. And in the second part of the table, you have all the situations in which the conditions of work are inadequate. For instance, poor ventilation in Antigua State College, or insufficient equipment, which is very important in most of these countries, not enough for the number of students that they have in Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So for development of further research, further innovation, which is something that is looked for, there is need for improvements in infrastructure. So just to close here, what I would like to highlight as takeaways from these preliminary findings that we found is that there is high demand and there are benefits of higher education in the region. There are difficulties with data, which impedes the development of evidence-based decisions. There is still a lot of room to improve quality assurance systems in the region. And importantly, there is a big need to improve the infrastructure and the teaching environment. With this, the innovation and partnerships probably could collaborate to strengthen teaching environments, infrastructure, and also to improve data collection systems, perhaps. So with this, I will close. I think I extended a bit more than what I was supposed to say, but I really thank you very much for your attention, and I am ready for questions. Just be aware that these are preliminary findings, but I have lots of more things that I would have shared with you. So if you want to ask any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Excellent, Dr. Mirelli. Thank you so very much for that overview. And we certainly appreciate that. As you indicated, it's preliminary at this stage in point. Are there any questions, any requests for clarification from any of our panelists, or indeed those who are within the general list of attendees? Dr. Mirelli, whilst persons are reflecting, may I ask you, how does the experience or the data arising from this preliminary research contrast with other SIDS, the Pacific, etc.? The experiences in the higher education system there, if you are able to speak on.
No, I think this is a very interesting question, because we have been comparing rather with the region and not with SIDS. So I think it would be a very, very important aspect to include in this report, to compare with SIDS. So far, our comparisons have been with the Caribbean, with the OECS in broader terms, and with Latin America. But I think we will need to include this variable in our report.
Okay. Thank you. Understood. The impact of, as you said there, the need for the investment in infrastructure, given some of the gaps that have been identified. And this, as noted in my preliminary remarks, is one of the critical issues that tertiary education systems from in the public sphere are struggling to sustain, their infrastructure, and particularly, as noted, within the organization or in the Eastern Caribbean states. I wondered at the whole matter of governance and the need to reform governance systems. Any thoughts on this?
Yes, especially our main finding has to do with quality assurance systems and the possibility of ensuring that the wide variety of institutions that exist in the region maintain a good quality level for all the different students that are there, because it's a very diverse students population that these institutions attend to. And we identify this problem of diploma mills, as they call them. And I think ensuring that quality assurance agencies are not only have the capacity, because this could be not so difficult to achieve, but ensuring that they are trusted and that they have an important visibility in the region, and they are used, and institutions go for the accreditation and for the external evaluations, for instance, and they use that as a signal to the system. In governance, perhaps, which is something we might need to look into more details, perhaps, but it has to do with supporting or creating an environment that facilitates the establishment of partnerships with different stakeholders, even across institutions in the region, perhaps, to create economies of scale. For that, you need an adequate legislative framework that allows for that.
Okay, thank you. Concerning and this is one of the things that we are in Jamaica, and I know my colleagues in Barbados, Grenada, Cuba, who are on the panel and focused on the members of the working group, would be able to speak to or share their experiences. But the matter of data, the currency, accuracy, the extent to which we are able to capture appropriate data so that we may have data influence and database decision making. Could you speak some more on that, please?
I think I could speak endlessly about that, because I've been working on this report, and that has been one of my nightmares. It is in some countries you have a lot of data, and there is a lot of data and increasingly more data on education. There is not so much data on tertiary education. So this is why we had 2 rounds of surveys to try to get information from national colleges. But as I said, there is I don't know if I'm going to get into too detailed methodological aspects, but there is one thing that I think is very difficult when we go to try and get data in the OECS 6 countries that I've looked at, that has to do with different definitions of the tertiary level, and then different definitions of the different, let's say, sectors or disciplines or areas. So just to give you a quick example, the difference between academic programs and technical programs, it's something so difficult to identify. And sometimes just because this is a very internal thing. Someone that I interviewed explained to me, well, this is a technical program because it was born out of a technical program that we had. But there was nothing in the content or in the name or anything that could tell me that that was a technical program. You see, so these kind of things that you have to know, and you cannot just from the data. So this is, yeah, it has been quite hard. Yeah.
Okay. What then? What would be then an appropriate response to this issue? The data collection, mining, etc.
Well, I think one of the first steps would be to agree on common definitions of things like tertiary education or post-secondary technical education, or these very, broader terms and indicators. That would help a lot, I think. Because I think there is not a problem with collecting data. There is data there. It's different to compare it.
Okay.
And it's not reported, perhaps. But colleges do collect data, I think.
Okay, understood. Infrastructure and teaching environment. Were you surprised at what you found? The graphic that you showed with the less than 5%, etc.
Yeah.
Were you surprised at what you found there?
Surprised? No, because I had already had lots of conversations with stakeholders in the region. We had also focus groups, discussions. No, I was not surprised. I don't know how that compares with the rest of the small islands or with the rest of the region. But definitely what happens is that it does mean a lot of obstacles to do what they would like to do.
Oh, understood. Any questions or comments from my colleagues? Request for clarification? Any comments?
Hi, good morning. Cheryl from, hello, Dr. Marelli. Cheryl Gibson from Barbados. I really enjoyed, if that's the right word, your presentation. One of the things, I am in the technical vocational area and kind of new in a way, but I'm the registrar of a particular institution. What comes to my mind when I was listening to I agree with everything you said about the data, trying to, find it in the format that makes it workable across, across all areas, for one better word. But competitiveness is something that came to my mind. What I'm finding in my area is that we all want to do well, but at the same time, not always seeing the same thing. You talk about the partnerships. It's almost like if the partnerships become competition. So like in my particular institution, we would want the what we call the Caribbean vocational qualifications, the CVQs. But at the same time, we're getting into an area where we have there's an entity coming out of the UK that can also come along and bolster our qualifications, which would make them even more like an international qualification. Qualification. And I know that we all want us to do well, but it's almost like we're going to end up seeing ourselves kind of coming at loggerheads where our national group is going to think that we may want to that this other partnership, which is not even completed yet, might look more like competition than support. Any thoughts on, is that something that is something that's expected, that we have to work through in the teething problems of trying to move our technical schools to the point, as the micro-credentialing and getting persons to the point where they can access tertiary education? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure I've interpreted your
Yes.
comments correctly, but like your question is more about like when you do a partnership with a more powerful partner, say, that they appear. But if you make a partnership with, I don't know, this UK institution, and it depends on how the partnership is arranged, no?
Right.
How would they compete with you? Because the students will prefer to go to study in that organization, but the organization is not there. So
right. I think it's a cultural. Yes, sorry about that. There's the, and I think this is where this, and that's what's the importance of what we're doing here, that whole cultural part of it as well. The reality of it is that international is good, but it doesn't mean what we offer locally isn't as good as.
No, okay.
And I am just, because it's opening up a conversation, and it's really how, as I've taken on this desk, and I'm new to this desk, I just recognize that trying to get everyone to understand that this is where we're going, partnerships. This is how we're going to help our citizens access higher education.
I think I have some more thoughts now that you said this.
Yeah. Okay,
very quickly, because we have been discussing this also in the group, and there are some people that are more pro partnerships with the private sector, some people that are more pro partnerships with the public sector, others with other educational institutions. So one thought is that when I speak about partnerships, I speak about all these different possibilities of partnership. I'm not only talking about one university abroad to give you prestige or something like that. And the other thing I think is a more elaborated thought about what I tried to say before, is that I think it's very important the terms of the agreement that you have with this partner, and trying to establish clearly what is their contribution and what is your contribution and what you are getting out of this partnership and what they could out of that partnership. I think that arrangement is very important when you, and why the partnership is important. I know this is like a very fashionable thing to talk about, but it's not just that, because I would discuss the idea of partnership per se. It's not like it's always good, as I said, in lots of aspects, but in the particular context of the OECS 6, I find that trying to work more together in networks, in any kind of collaboration, whatever name we want to put it, would help a lot in trying to do so many things that they have the willingness to do, and sometimes a lot of capacity there that is untapped. So in this context in particular, I think some or any kind of partnership that can be discussed could be helpful to
definitely
to move forward, to use the so-called economies of scale in some cases. But yeah, it is important to negotiate well these partnerships.
I think what you helped me in articulating, even as I go back to this particular initiative, the terms of the agreement. I think right now that's still a little, we're still defining that, and already, the thing is I don't think we understand the leverage that we have in developing the partnership. And we do, and I think it's not always what the other person wants. We have to know what we're getting and what our desired outcome is. So I think that has encouraged me when I go back to the table to share with my colleagues, you know, we can tell them what we want. We can say what it will look like. And I do believe that they're willing to do that. I just think sometimes at the table we get a little overwhelmed with how good everything sounds. And so you helped me with that. Thank you so much.
No problem. I'm happy to hear that.
Okay. All righty.
Okay. Damien, I don't know if you're talking to us, but you're muted.
Yes,
Sorry.
Dr. Mirelli. Thank you. I have another question coming from the chat. It says, given the critical role that quality assurance plays in higher education generally, and the appearance that it is relatively underdeveloped in a region that perhaps need it the most, would you suggest a country-by-country approach to developing QA systems, or a regional or shared approach? So could you just respond to that based on your experience from other regions?
Yes, yes. I have thought a lot about this, to be honest. So thank you very much for the question. First thing I think is something that has to come from the region and from the countries. That is something that is, I mean, if there is no space in the countries to work towards having national agencies, or rather to work towards having a regional, not a national agency, then that cannot happen. But my personal view is that it would be better to have a regional agency rather than to invest so much in different national agencies. Of course, the regional agency should have branches in the different states, but it would make more sense, in my analysis, based on these preliminary findings, to have a regional agency, again, for this economy of scales, but also because it would help other things like mobility around the islands, avoid these problems with the verification of the certificates and diplomas, because if you can trust that your organization is accredited, then you would not have to go through, you know, all the credits acquired in different institutions. So it would help very much the integration. It would help very much the economies of scales, as I said. But I understand that this is not something perhaps easy to do, because each country may have their own specific institutionalities and regulatory frameworks. So yeah, it should not come from me, but from what is debated in the region and in the countries.
Okay.
But that's my view.
Thank you. Thank you. We have another question coming from our colleague Mercedes Gonzalez in Cuba. Mercedes, please.
Sí,
Yes. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. So, above all, thank you very much for such an interesting presentation. It has been truly enlightening, and it has brought us together to the debate of such an important topic in regards of education. So Cuba does not escape to any of the problems that you have just mentioned in terms of funding, in terms of infrastructure, because all the different problems that were raised by the pandemic, we need to have in mind that all these problems and all these issues are real and that have been there for more than 60 years. And nowadays we have even more and more ways in which everything has exacerbated. So this is a very complex situation, and this economic situation also impacts the way in which our staff is going to be prepared in our different higher education institutions. For example, the ones that have a better preparation have some specific staff members that have had to pay for their education. But this has truly impacted the educational system. So this also impacts the access to higher education, especially because I think this was not mentioned, but it has to do with the motivation or the willingness of the students to engage this higher education, because it is not something that is always mentioned. But I'd like to know what your opinion is in terms of the motivation or the willingness on students to engage higher education, having in mind the very complex economical situation that our islands are going through. But on the other hand, I'd also like to know your opinion, because you talk about the cooperation, but I'd like you to talk about integration and the importance of integration and what kind of potentials you see in the integration of the Caribbean region with the Latin American region in order to find a way out for the different problems that we face in the region. Thank you very much. Is it okay if I respond in Spanish, or should I do it in English? Demian, what do you say, Spanish or English?
It's up to you. Entirely up to you.
Traducción, hablo en español, ¿sí?
Yeah.
Bueno.
Okay, I'm going to continue in Spanish. All right, so about collaboration and cooperation, anytime that I talk about networks, collaboration or cooperation, I'm also including integration in this aspect, because without a doubt, this is part, I'm not saying here that this is a step, but this is a comprehensive part of putting the different societies together in the Caribbean and the region. So if I didn't use the word integration, is because of the lack of language, the lack of vocabulary that I have. But of course, I consider that this is very important. And of course, I agree with you in the sense that this has to do with integration, especially when we're talking about quality assurance, because I was talking about that, because it is going to enable the mobility of students that we all know is going to help us out to have different cultural understandings, to different social scenarios or different educational scenarios, which is going to be very helpful for everything that has to do with the regional integration. Now, when you talk about motivation, this is something that we haven't studied yet, because to do so, you need to work with students or with those youngsters that are attending high school as to understand what their motivation is like. And this is something that we haven't studied yet. Yes, we do have some data in this regard, in regards of those young people who are not attending school or that are working in the region, and we have impressive figures there. But going back to this comment, I'd like to say that I'd like to talk about one of the impacts or one of the effects of the pandemic that was expected, but it seems not to be very strong now, which is a dropout in the enrollments. And I'm sorry that I need to go back to English, because sometimes when I'm talking technical language, I need to go back to English. But
that was predicted somehow that was going to happen after the pandemic, it did not happen. It did not materialize around the world on average. And we are still trying to understand what is the situation in the OECS. But generally speaking, what we have from the national colleges is that it did not decline, which is a very good, it's a very positive indicator. However, we have the problem of the academic readiness. So I don't know if that is related to motivation, to engagement, and the colleges have been working very hard with remedial interventions, with bridge programs. But of course, that requires more investment, better prepared staff to do this. So it still represents a challenge for the system. I hope I've answered. En español, inglés.
That's okay, Mercedes?
No, muchas gracias. Muy amable, sí. Todo bien, todo.
Yes, thank you very much. Everything was fine. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, thank you, colleagues. May I just shift, just to allow a presentation on some of the issues that we face in Jamaica. And what I will now do is just share a presentation. Let me just advise that we were expected to have had with us the Antigua and Barbuda's Minister of Education, Youth and the Creative Industries. But I don't know if technical issues has prevented his joining us, but we are in contact with the office and hopefully he will be able to join to give us his perspective from the formal sector. Let me just turn quickly then, and certainly Dr. Morelli, hopefully you'll be able to join and to share in this presentation, okay?
Thank you very much.
All right, good. I'm going to speak to the issue of Jamaica's experience with one aspect of our program, Vision 2030, which has to do with the wider project for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 SDGs, but with a particular focus on SDG 4, which has to do with quality education. And here I have a presentation that is guided by some of the data that emerged from our annual, that is to say, our meaning the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, our annual survey of tertiary education institutions. This shares some data that focuses and would give some appreciation for some of the issues that we in Jamaica face as a small island developing state. So here, as indicated, we do have a national vision, Vision 2030, and this has to do with a vision, Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. Goal 1 is Jamaicans are empowered to achieve their fullest potential. National outcome 2 is associated with this goal, focusing on world-class education and training. As a nation, small island development states the features as articulated earlier. We are facing some significant social challenges, social violence and crime, inequity in the structure of our education system and the subsectors, the impact of COVID-19, slow recovery at the level of the microeconomies post-COVID-19. And so whilst we acknowledge that there has been significant recovery and we are facing a challenge of a shortage of workers, we are seeing some disparities in the pace of the recovery and the impact. But nonetheless, overall, in terms of macroeconomic structure and environment, we are progressing fairly well. Within our higher education sector, there is the issue of expansion with enduring disparities, some of which come over from our colonial heritage and the system and structures that were instituted. There's a dated regulatory and legal framework, and Dr. Morelli did highlight that with respect to the governance issues, that there are defined education laws which are general for the sector as opposed to specific legislation, policy frameworks for the tertiary or higher education sector. Digital challenges, along with the increasing role of information technologies, and certainly funding challenges. The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission uses the annual survey of tertiary institutions as one of the critical mechanisms used to capture data to measure performance against targets related to SDG 4, Sustainable Development Goal 4. In 2020-2021, sector performance indicators included a 2% increase of the 24-plus population that holds a tertiary level certificate, a 2% increase in the admittance rate when we consider all the applicants and those admitted within the specific period in 2020 over 2019, so moving from 80% to 82%, a 6% increase in tertiary enrollment from 81,431 students in 2019 to 86,321 students in 2020. And presently we are in we're about to launch the survey for the year 2022-2023 and completing the data analysis for 2020-2021, 22, beg your pardon. So this, what I'm speaking to, as I said, comes from the 2021 report. A 1% increase in the gross enrollment rate from 33% to 34%, 2% increase in the net enrollment rate, and 2% increase in the gross tertiary graduation rate from 39% to 41%. When we speak about enrollment, when we speak about the gross tertiary graduation rate and the net enrollment rates, these are critical as it speaks to the whole matters related to equity and access and the extent to which we are improving in this matter. Gender distribution, and as indicated from the report by Dr. Morelli, we do see and appreciate that females dominate in terms of the gender distribution in enrollment, and this is to be noted and acknowledged. In terms of this selected elements of performance with respect to SDG 4, participation rate of youth and adults in tertiary education, what we are seeing here, in terms of our gross enrollment rate, we are at 34%. In terms of the global level in 2018, which is 38%, we are at 33%, so about 5 percentage points with respect to that average threshold globally. Proportion of youth and adults with information and communications technology skills by type of skill with a focus on ICT programs, approximately 4,000 youths graduating annually from ICT programs, and this is data going back. When we look at the gender parity index, critically, it's at 2.27% in 2020. Extent to which the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development are mainstreamed into the curricula. Sustainable environment management of focus, 36%. Gender equality, 27%. Cultural diversity, 27%. And issues related to violence and responding appropriately to violence, 9%. In terms of the coverage, the extent to which the curricula translates into action related to these core issues. Importantly, when we look at the factors that indicate threats to continued improvement in our performance indicators, the data, when we look at the two most significant institutions in terms of the total enrollment within Jamaica, the average graduation or completion rate is 45%, 45%. The 6-year graduation rate at the Mona campus of the University of the West Indies has decreased from 70% to 55%. When we look at the 6-year national tertiary graduation rate for 2015-2016, 26%. Based on the current patterns of graduation, it is estimated that 41% of young adults will graduate from tertiary education for the first time in their lives, before the age of 30, which is the average across the OECD. So a difference of 15 percentage points. So there is a significant gap that we would have to close with respect to our graduation rates. The three critical issues are funding, equity, and access. And no doubt, given what Dr. Morelli had indicated, these will be the same emerging from the Eastern Caribbean states, the sub. I want to speak generally to these principles that we acknowledge and certainly want to incorporate as we move forward. Coming out of the World Higher Education Conference in Barcelona, Spain in 2022, these 6 general and broad principles, inclusion, equity and diversity, academic freedom, inquiry, critical thinking and creativity, integrity and ethics, sustainability and social responsibility, cooperation for excellence. These principles, the World Higher Education Conference highlight and ask that we seek to shape the conversation concerning the future of higher education around. And for us, inclusion, equity, and diversity, and sustainability and social responsibility are two that are absolutely critical as we seek to develop sustainable tertiary education systems. Within Jamaica, there are two things that detain us. First, the regulatory and oversight framework. One, there is the need for specific legislation that will treat to the governance of the higher education sector. But within this legislation, moves to reduce duplications amongst the several national agencies that might be there for regulation, accreditation, the award of certification, and the general policy framework now that will be driven by the Ministry of Education and Youth. And so this modernized policy framework is on the horizon, and we anticipate relatively short time frame that it will be concluded. And then coming out of that will be the development of modern legislation for the sector. A funding model that focuses on reducing inequity and funding allocation, increasing support to students, and covering other costs associated with education. Because we do appreciate that it is not tuition that is the sole factor that contributes to successful student success, and critically as they move along in their journey through to the completion of their program. But the other social costs and the extent to which institutions are focused on assisting students with respect to their completion. So the road to 2030, as it is where we are presently in 2023, we have a series of medium-term economic frameworks, 3-year cycles. One for 2021 to 2024 is in the final year, and hence we are presently engaged in strategic review of the performance globally against the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but for ourselves within education, the extent to which we are achieving. The efforts to develop the medium-term economic framework for 24 to 27 has been launched. And so consultations are underway with the various stakeholders, including Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, so that we might be able to respond appropriately, given the trends, to define new targets for our new emphases for the period. And so we want then to note that the efforts are continuing with respect to our national efforts. So thank you very much. I wanted to share that with us, and then certainly to invite any final, any questions, comments that there may be. We do know that Dr. Morelli has had to go because of some other commitments, but we do appreciate her contributions. So in this last phase of this webinar, are there any questions, any comments, any final thoughts that we would like to share? Any questions for clarification with respect to Jamaica's performance? So the realities confronting policymakers and planners throughout the region, and particularly those within the small island development states, which essentially would be all of us throughout the Caribbean. Don't be fooled by the variety in the sizes, etc. But we are all faced with the same challenges concerning our funding, efforts at quality outcomes, sustaining motivation, infrastructure, looking at governance, looking at the policy framework, establishing and agreeing for collaborative efforts, focus on innovation, issues of youth employment, skills mismatches, the brain drain, the extent to which our post-secondary systems have been defined appropriately, and are they structured to be able to weather the challenges that we face? No pun intended there. But they certainly the whole matter of academic readiness post-COVID-19, and to what extent are we able to recoup that loss of learning, but certainly the performance, the worrying indicators. We continue to face high demand, but then again, to what extent are we able to satisfy these? There is a need to improve on the data that we gather and the extent to which that data guide appropriate decisions. One of the things that was noteworthy, and again, coming out of our education systems as they were defined in our colonial experience or the phases of our history, the definitions applied to institutions called college, definition applied to institutions called university, our technical vocational education and training system, and the extent to which we have qualifications frameworks in place, or qualification systems, the extent to which they allow for the definition and mobility, be holders of the qualifications to be able to move seamlessly. To what extent can we facilitate lifelong learning? The importance of data has been highlighted, and the extent to which we might be able to agree on common definitions, so that when we are doing the data analysis, we are then going to be able to see clearly and understand what is happening as we move from context to context to context. Well, the strengthening of the quality assurance system, certainly regionally, and particularly if we want to sustain our tertiary education systems, the issue of the quality assurance agency, as a certainly this is for the nations to decide. Is there a regional quality assurance structure that should be implemented that would then minimize the cost nationally, but certainly with national presence and the national reflections to satisfy the unique context? This is an issue that has been raised. And certainly we do know that this is up for the nations to speak to. The improvement in infrastructure, the teaching environment, again, this is a question and issue that is across the region. And we do note, we do appreciate the fact that the infrastructure that we have and the extent to which we are able to invest, the reality is that the constraints faced by the need to invest at the other levels and the need to facilitate quality outcomes. So very often, tertiary education sector is further down the totem pole with respect to the need to develop the physical and technological infrastructures, the teaching environment to support, as we said, their quality outcomes. In looking at the data for Jamaica, one of the things that we appreciate is that moving from the first year to the second year, consistently we see that 70% of students move. However, by the time they get to the 6-year point, which is generally speaking on a 4-year degree or 5 years on a 3-year degree, the time in which most persons graduate, what we see and appreciate is that 51% of those who began in the first year of a cohort graduate. And so this indicates that we're seeing significant wastage arising from the challenges that many persons face in terms of funding. They may start, but how do they continue? Because we do know that the cost associated with education is not limited to the tuition price. And so the matter of equity and access and funding, both institutions and at the individual space, funding is an issue that has to be developed. And we heard with respect to innovation and partnerships and the extent to which we might partner with other entities that are far more significant in terms of size, is that we do have the opportunity for collaboration. However, we have got to review the content, the nature, the issues associated with that collaboration. So we heard today on the unique features of the tertiary education systems in specific East Caribbean nations. And we certainly appreciate from Dr. Morelli the fact that the data is being pulled together so that a report might be presented. And they have committed, the World Bank, that once the report is finalized and approved, they would be willing to engage in a conversation with us further so that they might then have the freedom to speak in a more open, more manner with respect to the totality of the data in terms of and the recommendations associated with it. So we know these systems, and whilst it is that the matter of the data would have been located within the 5 areas, we do appreciate, as was stated by Mercedes, our colleague out of Cuba, that essentially the issues they face within Cuba are similar. So the strategies to develop resilient and sustainable tertiary education systems for SIDS, focusing and appreciative of the need to look at the issues of youth employment and the skills mismatches in particular, and then to look at governance and then address in a global and holistic manner the matter of funding. So these have been tabled today, and we certainly want to thank all of you. We appreciate your contribution, and we appreciate certainly the continuing emphasis on dialogue and consultation. Your feedback is appreciated, and we certainly will be including same in our overall report that we will be preparing. This certainly will be one that will be tabled within a larger regional consultation to be held in Havana, Cuba in the first week of February. I believe it's the 7th and 8th of February 2024, at which the reports from the various working groups will be tabled, will be debated, and then for inclusion in a declaration that will go on to Brasilia in March 13 to 15, 2024. So if there are no other comments, it will be certainly my pleasure to say thank you, to acknowledge your presence, and to thank you for having contributed to what has been a very good dialogue today. We note your presence and participation at this time of the year, but we do appreciate this, and we ask that you continue to support us as we proceed. To our colleagues in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we know that the focus there has been shifted to their own involvement in some regional negotiation between Venezuela and Guyana, and we look forward to every success where this is concerned. And so we note and we thank you all. Are there any other final questions or comments before we close? No? Okay, well, thank you so very much. Please have a very good day. Enjoy the holiday season as you're able to. And we trust that all will be well and that there will be season of peace, stability, and certainly as we look forward to a sustainable future for our tertiary education systems. Thank you so very much, and have a good day now. Thank you.